So this rug looks like it has a lot of different things going on in the pattern, but in fact, one of the great things about rugs is they're often very simple. And with this rug, it's all plain weave. So it's going to weave up fairly quickly, and what takes most of the time is the color changes. So you can see here that we've got a 1-inch border, and then we're alternating between two different motifs. So we're calling this motif 1 and this motif 2. So motif 1 alternates through different color changes, and it looks quite different depending on how you're using those colors. But motif 2, where you just have that background color and then the little shape on top, stays the same throughout the whole rug, and that gives it this kind of rhythmic feeling. So really what I want to show you here is what it looks like to weave motif 1 and motif 2, and then you can go ahead and weave that yourself. There's a couple of things to keep in mind when setting up your loom. The first is that we're just using 2 shafts for this project, so even if you have a 4 or 8 shaft loom, we're just going to be using shafts 1 and 2. And we've made sure that we have both of our selvages threaded on shaft 2 because we want this warp to be symmetrical, because it's going to help us keep our selvages nice as we weave. So we've got both selvages on shaft 2 and then alternating between 2 and 1, 2 and 1. You can also see here that there are 2 warp threads going through every heddle. So this is something we don't normally do in weaving, but it's a specific technique for rugs that helps keep everything nice and flat in our rug and gives us the strength of warp we need to really pack that weft in densely. So we've got our setup to the width that we want. This one is obviously a mini sample for you. Yours will probably be much bigger. Here I'm using a 4-dent reed, but you could also use an 8-dent reed. You just want to make sure that you have 8 ends in every inch. So if you're using a 4-dent reed, that means 1 bundle of 2 in every slot. And if you're using an 8-dent reed, then you're going to be skipping every second slot. So I've woven a 1-inch border here in the black, and there's about 40 picks here, and it makes about 1 inch, so that gives you an idea of the kind of density that you're looking for. And you can see that we can't see the warp through this at all. So now we're going to move to shaft 1, and there's a little L in your pattern which tells you to start on the left-hand side with this bone color. So we're going to start on the left, tuck the tail as you normally would, and then we're going to do 11 picks here. So that's 1, 11 picks. And there's an L again in the pattern, which tells me that I need to start the black on the left-hand side. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Tuck the tail here. I'm just using the threads at the bottom of the shed for tucking the tail in the black here, because I don't want the black to cover this selvage, because in the pattern motif it's this bone color along the edge. So that's just a little way to keep it looking neater. Now for this next part, I'm going to show you a few different ways to manage your selvages, which is really the key to weaving nice rugs. So there are a couple of tips and tricks. One is that it's important which side of your project you start your shuttle on to make sure that the selvages are getting covered in the way that you want. So in the pattern we've used L or R to tell you where to start, right or left. And then we've also used a little shuttle icon. And what that means is, instead of just throwing the shuttle as you normally would, it leaves out this selvage here. So the selvage icon tells you that you need to dip under that selvage in order to catch it. So now it's caught on this side, as you can see. So we can go ahead and beat that in. Then we just have a regular black pick here. Now for this next one, there's also another shuttle icon, so we're going to go ahead and do that. Dip under the edge. As you weave this motif a couple of times, you won't need to look at the pattern so much anymore probably, but at first you just need to keep close tabs on what that shuttle is doing. Okay, so now you'll notice in your pattern there's not a shuttle icon, but there is a little loop-de-loop icon. And what that means is instead of just catching like we did with the shuttle icon, we're doing an extra loop around. So what that looks like is pretty much exactly like the icon. We're just doing an extra loop before catching that edge. So you see how we've got the little loop-de-loop around? What that's doing is filling in this extra space on the selvage thread. And it's making our edge look nice and full. Because with these black ones, we're not catching the selvage every time because we don't want to with this pattern. So to make it look nice and even on the selvage, that's how we do it, is with that extra loop. Now we're just going to go ahead and do the same thing on this side. So we'll continue on with that again. So it can get easy to kind of tangle these threads on the side. So I try and keep the one that I'm not using just out of my way. I'm using a little table here, but if I had more space, I might just keep it to the right of my loom. So I'm going to go ahead and dip under again, following the pattern with that shuttle icon. It's nice that with the black, you don't have to mess around with it for this part of the motif. So just the bone work we're fussing with here. So I'm at the end of this black now, so I've done 10 rows of black and I'm ready to go ahead and end that thread. And then I'm going to finish this part here with 5 picks of the bone, and that little shuttle icon tells me that I'm making sure that I catch that edge there. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay. It's looking pretty good. It's time to introduce the fox red, and there's an L in the pattern, so I'm going to start on the left. Tuck this tail. And there's that little loop-de-loop icon, so I'm going to do that. Tucking under the selvage, and then tucking under it Second time as I go through. Same thing on this side. So you might notice that we're alternating the loop-de-loops on each side with just catching the selvage on each side. Now that we've got enough of our fox red here, I'm going to go ahead and tuck that tail. And we're just going to end this section with 5 picks of the bone, making sure to dip under the selvage as it says in the pattern. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And now we're just going to repeat exactly what we did in this black section now. So we're starting on the left-hand side with the black. Ending with 5 of the bone. That brings us to the end of motif 1. And throughout the rug you'll do the same motif in a variety of different colors, but everything that I did with the shuttle there stays the same, of course. So it can seem a little bit complicated at first managing the edges, but just remember that if you're not covering the edges well, you can do an extra loop around. If you're not catching your selvages, make sure to just dip under with the nose of your shuttle. And if you're seeing anything that looks funny in your rug, like say that you're starting to get black in sections where you don't want black, just reverse, make sure that you're starting on the correct side of the pattern, and you should be set to go. For motif 2, we're starting on shaft 2, and we are starting on the right. So we're going to do 20 picks of black to start us off. Now we're starting the wolf gray, and we're starting on the left-hand side on shaft 2. And then we're doing that extra little wraparound for the black. Just like we did, same as motif 1 in terms of the techniques there. Same thing on the other side. Now we're just back to the regular nose under for this black pick. So far the gray has just been regular throwing of the shuttle. Here we've got 2 wolf gray in a row. And back to black. Now it's going to be our wolf gray that's doing the extra loop-de-loops here. So we're going to use that to go around. And you can see we're starting to get the second part of this motif, where we want to have this wolf gray on the edges. And again, same thing other side here. So we're going to make sure that we're catching the extra loop-de-loop with that wolf gray so that it's covering our selvage nicely. And one last time here with the loop-de-loop on the wolf gray. And here's where we do that wolf gray twice in a row, and that's how the pattern switches up. Just a regular black is next. Regular wolf gray. And black where has that shuttle icon, so we're catching the selvage there. Regular wolf gray. Now we've got a loop-de-loop black. A regular wolf gray. This is our last wolf gray, so we can go ahead and end that thread. And we've got a loop-de-loop on this side with the black to finish off this last section of motif 2. And we have 19 picks of the black there, so that was 1, 2, all right, and so that's 19 picks ending on shaft 1. And then I can go ahead and end that black thread there. All right, there you have it. Motif 1, motif 2, and you're just alternating between those two for the entire rug and just switching up the colors for the motif 1. Make sure you finish with a border on the other side, and then once you take the project off the loom, you can just tie little knots to finish it. So I'll show you how to do that as well. All right, we're going to pretend this is the end of our rug. We want to leave ourselves as much thread to tie as is reasonable, so it's not fun to tie knots with tiny short little threads. So even though our knots are only going to be maybe this long, we want to give ourselves lots of room. So I'm even going to actually cut behind here, just making sure, of course, not to cut my petals. And then just gonna cut here. Just doing some sampling in the other colorways there. Okay. So I have my mini rug off the loom, and I'll show you how I tie my knots to make them look nice and even. Okay, so we're gonna secure these tails with little knots before we wet finish our rug. So I like to put something heavy while I'm tying the knot so I can pull a little bit on this and not have it move around too much. In the bigger rug, I've used bundles of 6 here, so I'll do that in this example as well. Though you could do little bundles of 4 if you wanted, or you could even do probably 8 would be fine too. So depending on what size of little knots you are looking for. So it's just a simple overhand knot, so not doing anything fancy here. There are lots of different kinds of rug finishing techniques, but my personal favorite for how these rugs have turned out is just a really nice, simple knot, because there's enough going on in the pattern of the dash and dot rug that you really don't need to do anything wild to make it more interesting in the finish. So a regular knot, overhand knot is probably the term you may have seen. So the tail goes over top of the bundle, you reach your fingers through, and then you try and snug it up as close as you can to your rug there. If you make the knots consistently as you go, they'll look a little bit cleaner. So if you make them the same way, so making sure that you're always going over top. The tails of the rug warp will fray a little bit when you wash it and give it kind of a softer finish. So I like to trim them to the size that I want before I wash them, so that kind of little finished frayed edge looks intentional. If for whatever reason you have a grouping that isn't perfect, so say we only had maybe 4 threads at the end here, I would try and kind of spread them out as evenly as possible. So say I got to the end here and I realized, oh, I only have 5 threads or whatever the situation was. Truthfully, you're not really going to be able to tell. So sometimes I'll just, if I have less threads, I'll just do a knot that's not quite as snug to bulk it up a little bit. But as long as they're about right, you're in good shape. So there we go. We can cut them as short as we want, pretty much. I usually go for about 1 inch or just a smidge under that, and I'll do the same thing on the other side.